Hello, and welcome to our latest webinar on cloud cost optimization. I'll let Anthony introduce himself.
Thanks, Kevin. My name is Anthony Rivera. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Access Point. Have over 23 years in the industry, both on the IT side and the cybersecurity side of deploying security programs to various industries using cloud for many of those deployments. So excited to be here.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Hartwig. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Services here at Access Point Consulting. My background's a little bit varied. I started out more on the software engineering side, working with companies to build out software systems, and then eventually caught the cloud bug working on a cloud migration project at one of those companies and transitioned more over to site reliability engineering, where I've been working for the past 10 years, kind of helping companies at various sizes perfect their systems and kind of handle infrastructure challenges. For today, we're going to go over kind of some best practices and just a general overview of cloud cost management in the cloud. We're going to talk about cloud cost dashboards, budget alarms, some alternative payment models you can think about when purchasing, how to right size your instances and some thoughts around that, and then finally data tiering strategies.
Awesome. So starting us off, we're going to talk about cloud cost dashboards. And I would just say, as part of this overall series, cloud cost optimization is one of those key areas that companies, whether you are brand new to the cloud or you've been in the cloud for years, it's a really important topic. It can quickly get out of hand if you're not careful about how you're approaching it. And today's conversation is kind of all, the starting points, the discussion points that we want to talk about. But cloud cost dashboards give you that visibility into the cloud, what's going on, what your current spend is, utilization rates, all of those things. So it's one of the most important tools to have set up from day one. If you don't have it set up, it's really important to get that level of visibility because it's going to help you in the long run understand, why am I spending so much in the cloud? Why do I have so much utilization? Do I have waste? Do I have an opportunity to maybe scale to a more cost-effective model? Do I have too many cloud instances? Am I using too many different providers? So, a cloud dashboard is a really great way to get your data centralized, to identify, those areas that you're spending and, really keep track of them. I think, Kevin, to any feedback, anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think we talk about observability quite a bit in other areas, how your application's running, how your services are performing, how secure you are. But observability is kind of it. It's a holistic. This is kind of the holistic version of cloud costs and how you can visualize those for your entire company. One of the big things that the cloud cost dashboards do and providers is they help bubble up all of your costs from all of your different resources and accounts into one kind of space. One of the things that you can do here is you can potentially give access to your billing person or your finance folks to be able to view like where your spend is. You can create automated reporting of your spend, notify uh, stakeholders of what their current spend is. You can also look at how to visualize costs and how they break down by resources and components of your systems, breaking down by the account, using cost allocation tags and things like that to help better understand where your stuff's coming from. I know in previous roles we've used cost allocation tags to tie expenses to given departments or given customers and things like that, kind of help you better understand where your costs are coming from. And then the big thing is there it just provides real-time monitoring. So most cloud cost dashboards are updated at least once a day. Most of them are more than one time per day. So you can see about when I rolled out a new feature, how much is that costing and things like that. So it's something everybody should be looking at. It's not just the job of one area of your company to manage cloud costs. It's going to be everybody. And so these just kind of help bubble that information up and make it visible for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kevin. Right? It's not an IT or a security function. It's everybody. Everybody should have a line of sight into that. Whether it's FinOps, your finance team having a level of visibility into that so that they can understand it, and also introducing them to that level of capability because they might not understand it, right, from a traditional perspective of managing operational cost or capex cost for IT. So really important, have that conversation, get more people involved in it, I think is the best advice we can give, and have that visibility into your data set and cost.
Yeah, that's great. Next up, we'll be talking a little bit about budget alarms. This is something I suggest for every company. Everybody goes into the cloud with best expectations of spending as little as possible, but until you're really in there, you can't quite know how much things are going to cost. You can do your best at planning, do that kind of thing, but I always suggest setting thresholds on different components. When you're releasing a new system, add a budget alarm to it. Set it at 85% or 90% of what your expected spend is. You'll get notified when you hit that point, and you can compare how much your spend has hit versus where you are in the month. Things like that really help you kind of understand better, like what information is there. You can also use it to, just help with cost overruns. Like if you set a budget alarm and you say, hey, I want this to limit my spend for this service, you can set it so that it's an advisory budget alarm, or it can actually just turn off that service at that point, which is not always something I would suggest, but for certain circumstances, you want to make sure that, like in your dev environment or your QA environment or something like that, where maybe it's not as important to be running all the time, and you want to cut off spend before it hits a point where it's going to affect your company. I think the big thing here is the easy integration with other cloud management tools. We talked about cloud cost dashboards, but there are a number of kind of more observability platforms that companies can leverage, such as Datadog or others, where you can send your cloud cost information, you can send your budget alarms to, and you can use that as like standard alerting into whatever your observability platform is. Anthony, I know that you've kind of handled a lot of budget alarms and
Yeah.
cloud costs before. Do you have any best practices you like to think through?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head here, Kevin, with what you said. I would just kind of stress the importance, right? I mean, I've seen, we've seen where, you know, cost can quickly get out of hand, and whether that's, hey, we're going to throw something up and test, and we're going to test it, and we forget about it over the weekend, and you come in on a long weekend, or back from a long weekend, I should say, and all of a sudden, your cost calculator is going through the roof, right? It can be something completely innocent that creates, hey, you went over on my Lambda functions or something like that, or Azure functions. So it's really important, because having that ability to get alerted on something, not only is it a good barometer of how you're operating in your environment, and from a business perspective, it'll help you kind of set those expectations. Everybody's working on, improving margins and cost, right? Cost of goods sold. So, these are really table stakes when it comes to operating within the cloud. So you have that good barometer. But I agree with everything here. I think it's critically important.
Yeah, I think budget alarms are kind of the first thing that I look to when I'm evaluating cloud costs, is just kind of setting some things up so you're alerted when you're hit. It's kind of my view of the cloud in general, is setting alerts and alarms that notify you when things are out of what your expectations are. So they're just kind of a good best practice, and they're easy to set up. So I suggest them.
Yeah. Alternative payment models is another, key area here. And, again, kind of scratching the surface, but talking about things like reserved instances, savings plans, reservation spot instances, dedicated hosts, free tiers. Depending on where you are and what you're using in the cloud, some of these terms may be applicable, some may not be. There may be other terms depending on the provider. But basically, the general synopsis is the cloud payment system can be flexible. It is flexible, and it's really important to have a tight alignment on your cloud costs to the value, right? So that you're gaining the maximum amount of efficiency, but also at the right price point, right? And so, that can depend on what technology you're using, whether you're, the size of your VM, the type of function that you're using. whether that's a spot instance, and I'll defer to Kevin on what some of these are from a more technical level because he's definitely more familiar than I am. But every provider gives you a different level of capability at a different price point, and those price points change on a regular basis. So that's another thing to be aware of is, are my cost models from my provider changing? So, Kevin, I'll pass it to you for more of a technical, if there's any.
Yeah, no, that was a great overview. I think that we talk about it in just about every webinar we've done so far is the first step with everything in the cloud is understanding your systems and how they perform, how you need to use them. In this case, we're talking more about how you can save money by understanding your systems versus, what to purchase. But once you have an understanding of how your systems runs, either through budget alarms or setting up monitoring and things like that, you can start looking into some of these alternative payment models, which basically just allow you to either pre-purchase a certain level of spend, either on a specific instance type or other areas, or just purchasing a savings plan saying, hey, I know last year I spent X amount of money. That is kind of my base that I know I'm going to spend in this provider. And the cloud providers will allow you to potentially purchase ahead of time at a discounted rate that same level of spend. It's just kind of, I hate to say it, but it's kind of free money at that point. Like you're going to be using the service either way. Work with them to say, hey, I know that I'm going to hit this level of spend this year. How can you help me reduce my costs? And that's really the main thing to take away from this slide is like there are a number of avenues to help you reduce costs for the things you're already going to be spending on money on. Reserved instances basically allows you to say, hey, I'm using this instance type in AWS or Azure, and I know that I'm going to need that for the next year or 3 years. So I would like to pre-purchase that allocation of this instance, and usually you can get a 30+% decrease in cost based off of that. Savings plans are very similar. They're a little bit more flexible, I would say, than like reserving a specific instance or some of the other models. They say, hey, I spent $100,000 last year. I know that I'm going to spend at least that this year. How can you help me spread that money across the resources I'm purchasing at a lower rate? And generally, you can save quite a bit there. I think it's at least 25% plus. Exact numbers obviously work with your cloud provider to kind of understand that. Azure reservations, very similar to reserved instances, but they are more flexible than the AWS model with reserved instances, and they also have more flexible payment options, which is also really nice. Spot instances are a great way to think about hosting your non-critical systems. So if something doesn't need to be up right away, or if it can go down for a minute or something like that, it may be a better option to host on a spot instance. And you just get a flat cost reduction based off of weighted instance type you purchase. These are great for dev systems where maybe you can wait an extra 5 minutes for a resource to spin up before you're able to use it. So that's definitely something to think about. Dedicated hosts, this is kind of more of you are purchasing a specific instance in a cloud provider. So this is it's very similar to the bare metal options. It's more like you're hosting it in your own data center, but they are managing the hosting of it for you. And then you can install your own licensing and you can install your other things. So there's some cost efficiencies there too, potentially bringing your own license and other things to a cloud platform. And then this is kind of the big one, free tiers. Leverage free tiers where at all possible. If you're working on a new project where maybe you don't understand what you're going to need, and you're okay to spin up maybe less resource intensive instances to trial that out, most cloud providers have very generous free tiers. So take advantage of those where you can, especially in dev or QA or where you're prototyping new features.
Yeah, and I would say
So
that that's something, Kevin, that you and I have done, in the years that we've worked together on cloud is kind of really look at that, right? Can we get a minimum viable product using the free tier? And then, as we've proved value, then roll it out and do what you need. But I think you touched on a really critical point, right? Not every instance needs to be match production, right? So, do you need that same level of capability? Maybe you need it for stage, but do you need it for dev or your test environment? Obviously every business is different, every approach is different, but I think conceptually what we're trying to say here is it's not a one size fits all for cloud. You can work with your provider. You can ask them these questions. If you have any kind of account manager, kind of talk to them and start the conversation so that you can effectively plan and budget, around this.
Yeah, it's great information. Next up, we're going to talk about right sizing instances, and this,
Yeah.
we've already talked about understanding your workloads. This is one of the most important things you can do when you're in the cloud is understand how your systems are performing. Set up performance monitoring. Again, find an observability platform or use the built-in platforms for whatever cloud provider you're deploying to. This is all just gonna better help you understand how your systems are running, what instance sizes you need, how you can best leverage the tools available for you in the cloud. Because they are very different than in a data center. Like scaling in a data center is a lot more cumbersome of a process, I'd say, than
Yeah.
scaling in the cloud. And that kind of just leads to the next bullet point about implementing auto scaling. This is one of the great features of the cloud is that they have so many resources available to you, and most of it you can use at a real-time basis. So implementing auto scaling allows your systems to scale out either horizontally or vertically, and I'll explain a little bit more what those are, to allow greater system load to be handled by your system without you having to, deploy a new instance or things like you traditionally have to do. So vertical auto scaling is typically where you're increasing the resource availability on a given instance, and horizontal scaling is where you scale out instance counts to better handle those loads. And there's kind of reasons why you would choose one or the other, but it's a great way to one save money because you can scale down when your resources aren't in heavy need, and also handle increased load that you're not expecting. So that could be a good load, like you got a new customer in and you're actually using much more of your system than you expected, or potentially in the case of a security incident, it could be that malicious activity is trying to compromise your systems, and you don't want to bring it down. So scaling up to handle that could potentially be an option. Anthony, I know that we've had to do this, at previous jobs and a current job. How do you think about right sizing your instances?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, going back to what we just said, right? Can conceptually growing into what you need, and that's the great benefit that the cloud offers, right? Is that you can scale very easily as opposed to a traditional, let me go out and buy a physical server, or let me spin up this type of VM in my VMware architecture, or whatever you're using. That's the flexibility of the cloud, is to be able to dynamically change and adapt to your workload needs. I can't tell you how many times we've seen, hey, that's running in the cloud, and why is that still running, right? We constantly have, those things that we're finding in our customers and our environment, like we obviously making sure that we know what's running, why is it running, why is it still, does it need to be this size? I think the tendency to oversubscribe is really high, right? And we're not just talking about VMs. I mean, obviously, from a cloud perspective, it could be network infrastructure with firewalls and IDSs and web application firewalls, right? So just properly sizing. Most of the vendors give you that prescriptive, hey, here's where we think you should be based on connections, based on workload. So it's really important to kind of follow that, but also take advantage of what we just talked about. Can we start out smaller and grow into it? Adopt auto scaling. I mean, auto scaling is a game changer, right? Because historically, you just had to buy the workload that you needed to support your maximum capability. But with auto scaling, if your business gets seasonally busy, you can just auto scale it for the months that you are busy, and then reduce your costs on the months that you're not. So a lot of capability here, and again, this is something to talk to with your provider, or with your advisors, and say, how do I make this work within my environment, and adapt that.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to add here is just that if you're looking at rolling out in the cloud, understand that everything isn't one size fits all. They, generally when you're thinking of buying instances, you're thinking more the general purpose style, which is you get a certain amount of compute, a certain amount of memory, and it kind of scales uh, normally over that curve. But there's also compute optimized and memory optimized instances you can look at. So if you need a large amount of memory, but your CPU usage is very low on an instance, look at leveraging something like that. It may save you money. Compute optimized is the same way. There's a lot of services that are very compute heavy, but they may not have a lot of memories that they're using to you handle that. And so looking into how you can best leverage that. And then there's also storage optimized units. So basically, understanding your workload will help you better understand how you need to roll out your systems. And the biggest cost savings that I've found over the years is terminating idle instances.
Yeah.
Uh, especially in dev and QA where people will spin up things as a trial, make sure that you have some sort of either manual termination process or better yet, automate your termination process in dev. Like if a system doesn't need to be running more than a week, set up auto termination at the end of that week of anything
Hmm.
that was created. It's just going to save you money. And generally in those environments, like the time to spin it up is probably much less than the amount of time the amount of money you're going to save by terminating those instances when they're not in use.
Yeah, absolutely. And having, again, if you can't automate that process, then at least have some type of a review where you're going in periodically and taking a look. You may be surprised at what you find, right? I mean, it's
Yep.
highly probable that you have a VM or some type of instance that's running that doesn't need to be running. We see it all the time with customers, and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe that's been running for so long." Even if it's a periodic, quarterly, monthly type of check, it can save you. It can save you some serious money. So just make these small adjustments into your plan, or factor them into your plan if you're going to the cloud, and you can kind of avoid a lot of unexpected costs. Data tiering.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, data tiering is it's an interesting topic. Again, I think it's where a lot of people can get hurt or get into trouble if they're not careful. So, when we talk about data tiering, obviously within the cloud, depending on your storage mechanism that you're using, there's different price points. There's different rules for accessing data. So, as an example, in AWS, they have their S3 storage, where yeah, it's a very cost effective type of storage. But then they also offer things like Glacier that has an even cheaper price point, assuming that you're not going to access that data very frequently. It's not a highly transactional system. So if you're accessing data from that very often, then the price point is going to go up because Glacier is a very expensive retrieval system, if you will. So data tiering kind of ties back into understanding your environment, right sizing it from the start, making sure that you have the right type of storage that you need for your application, based on your retention policies, based on your application performance, right? What's my archive process, right? Do I need to keep this data? How long do I need to keep the data? All of those things should be considered. Where am I storing the data, right? Not all regions are equal in terms of data storage. So if you look at cost calculators, it's going to have a region and availability zone. So look at that, right? Where am I putting my data? Do I need to put it, on the East and West Coast? Do I need to put it overseas? What are my costs for that? It's going to be a completely different cost structure depending on the provider, depending on the location, depending on the need. So it's hard to point with any specificity here other than to just say these are things that you should look at. Consider access tiers, right? Consider your data tiers. Talk about, retention of data. How much data do we need to keep in the cloud versus backup offsite versus long-term storage like a Glacier solution. So I kind of jumped around on this slide a little bit, Kevin, but anything that you want to kind of add on to?
I couldn't agree more with what you said. I think the big thing is talk with your compliance team. How long do you need to store data? How often do you need to access the data? Maybe talk to your application teams. Like if you're writing an application such that, recent data needs to be accessed very quickly. It needs to be available, but over time that data is accessed at a less high rate. You can use something like an infrequent access tier where it's like you can put the data on there much cheaper. It's stored much cheaper. There may be some increased latency when it does need to be accessed, but that's something you can plan for inside your system. This works really well in like a document management system or something where generally documents go in, people read them for the near term, but after a while, it's more that you're keeping those documents around for compliance needs or for audits or whatever else you need. A great explanation of cold storage. I think uh, Glacier is the cold storage for AWS. There's kind of multiple tiers of storage. You can hot storage is basically the most available. It's the most expensive,
Yep.
obviously. But if you need your data and you need it all the time, hot storage where it's at. Warm data is kind of similar to the infrequent access, or we talked about, where it's available for you if you need it at a pretty quick rate, but it may not be quite as available as hot storage. And then there's kind of cold storage where it's you put it off, it's the cheapest storage, it's for data that you need to keep around, but you don't need to access on a regular basis. And generally, it comes with kind of a downside of increased cost to access. A lot of times they charge you to access cold storage data. It's more difficult for them. Obviously, they need to potentially load that in from some sort of
Mhm.
storage method that's not online all the time. And it also it may require a certain amount of time to recover. I know that when I was looking back at cold storage, it may require up to an hour or two potentially to get that data available to you. But those just considerations at every tier that you need to start thinking about, and again, understanding your data and the retention needs. One thing I wanted to call out here is that a lot of the cloud providers have started implementing what they call intelligent tiering.
Mm.
Basically, what that does is it'll try to move data between more of a hot and a warm tier. And based off of how often data is accessed, they will intelligently tier that data down to more of a warm tier to save you money. And this is something like it's great. You can turn it on and monitor, see if that's something that your company finds useful. It probably will just save you money. But if your data needs to be available right now all the time, that's probably not something that you should be looking at.
Yeah, one other point to consider, Kevin, and you kind of just made me think about it, is your data transfer costs too. That's
Oh,
something that will,
nobody
you
thinks
want to
about
plan ahead.
that.
Yeah. You want to kind of plan ahead for your data transfer, right? So getting your data to the cloud, and again, depending on the provider, AWS, they have edge locations. They have ways of connecting into, their ecosystem and uploading data at bulk if you're making that lift and shift to the cloud. If you're taking data out of the cloud, obviously too, let's say you're pumping it out of the cloud into a on-site hybrid type of environment. All different things to consider. Back to the data tiers, different price points, right? So keep that in the plan because if you have a large volume of data that you're moving frequently, that's going to affect your cost structure as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great call out, Anthony. All right, we've kind of come towards the end of this webinar. Just to give you a little recap of what we talked about, the importance of monitoring costs in the cloud. Just about every slide talk through that. Like there's cost savings out there probably for every company. So understanding how to monitor that is going to really save you money in the long run. Using budget alarms is just a great way to notify yourself whenever that your spend is higher than you're expecting. Way to save money without usage. Consider like what types of instances you're running. Do you need the largest, most powerful instance? Can you handle some sort of auto scaling instead of buying the largest instance? Things like that. And then, of course, we just talked about planning your data usage wisely. Like you can save a lot of money by just understanding how your data is accessed and how to best store it in your system. And if you enjoyed this webinar, we have a few others out there on some of these best practice topics as well. So take a look for those. And thank you all for your time. And if you wanted to chat more about today's topic or anything, feel free to reach out to Anthony or I based off our email below. Or if you're interested in Access Point Consulting and what we offer as a company, please go to our website at accesspointconsulting.com. Thank you.